to moderate this session about resilient modes of inhabitation. Thank you all for attending. This session will have the maximum duration of 1 hour, but I'm sure that we will have a short but very intense debate. We have with us 6 guests from different countries and schools of architecture from Italy, Croatia, Portugal, and Greece. Let's see how we can manage with time, but I'm aware that we are all from southern countries, so super relaxed. I hope I don't have to be German today with you. I'm joking, feel free to add comments to the other speaker perspective anytime if you find it appropriate. I also want to invite all the audience to participate with questions. I know that the online platform has a form near the live stream channel where you can write. My colleague Bruno Moreira, also a researcher from FAUP, will be checking them. Thank you, Bruno, for helping us with that, and also helping me collect the key statements that I will try to present in the final report. So we have with us Jana Horvath. She's a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Architecture, University of Zagreb. Martina Massari, she's an adjunct professor at the Department of Architecture of the University of Bologna. Nuno Valentim is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Architecture from the University of Porto, is my colleague. Ricardo Agares is a senior researcher from ISCTE, University Institute of Lisbon. Ricardo Davina, he is an advanced service design student from the University of Bologna. And Sarah Bryce, she's a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Architecture and Built Environment and at TU Delft. Thank you all again for joining me. Well, before starting the debate and giving our guests the floor, just a few words about this session, about resilient modes of inhabitation and what we aim to debate here within the framework of NEBgS South and the question of housing. And let us start naturally with the 2 main keywords, inhabiting, which is, as we stated in the opening text of this session, an act of appropriation connected with diverse ways of living in modes of inhabitation, and resilience, that is, the ability to adapt quickly to change. An adaptation that has necessarily to be balanced and negotiated between the inhabitants and the building structure's characteristics. A strong start point for this debate is the idea that not all housing stock will be deeply refurbished or retrofitted in the near future, especially in the southern countries, so intermediate paths must be found to deal with changes in life courses, climate change, migration, or simply with the built structure's natural aging or degradation. On the one hand, in some way, inhabitants must understand and take advantage of their buildings' inner characteristics. On the other hand, housing buildings need to be able to incorporate different levels of transformation. So the first and natural general question is how to promote resilient modes of inhabitation in Southern European countries, having in mind the new Bauhaus flags, shaping more beautiful, sustainable, and inclusive forms of living together. Previously to this session, I asked our guests to point out some of their key statements regarding our core subjects, which allow me to break up the discussion in 3 main points. Point 1, resilience as an adaptation to change. Point 2, inhabitants and the building environment knowledge. And point 3, participatory processes, cooperation, and resilient communities. So let's start here, maybe about the first, resilience and adaptation to change. Jana, in your perspective, how to quickly adapt housing to dynamic change in inhabiting? I referred already aging, climate change, and others, but I think I have missed migration. Could you please share your thoughts about this particular subject, having Croatia in mind?
Of course. So first, hi to everybody. It's really nice to be here today. So yeah, I'm very interested in planning for a kind of this changed demographic environment where there's a population flux and numbers are uncertain. In Croatia, especially in smaller towns, there is a lot of trouble with actually population drops that can be quite rapid and kind of happen unexpectedly. That actually poses a constant threat to newly planned housing as well as existing housing. So on that note, I could maybe just very briefly talk about my experience with an urban planning project that we are working on, my team and me, right now in Karlovac. So it's a relatively small city here in Croatia. Actually, the project was one of the finalists for this new European Bauhaus Prize that was just awarded past month. And yeah, so in Karlovac, we tried to plan perhaps more resilient type of housing, bearing in mind this uncertain demographic issue. So we envisioned relatively narrow 10-story housing towers that can actually, as weird as it sounds, double as vertical greenhouses, as hydroponic farms. And those farms consist of modular hydroponic units that can be moved around when necessary, and they can inhabit a usual just housing tower floor plan basic with 2 apartments per floor. So the idea, as weird as it sounds, is actually very simple. So we build the towers and inhabit them in the plant to human ratio that is needed at the moment, according to a demographic study. And if we don't have enough inhabitants at first, we'll have more farms and sell the produce on the local farmers market. And gradually, the idea is, and hope, is that the new neighborhood would attract enough new residents and that we would eventually move most of the farms to a vacant plot in the nearby area. So the general idea here is that we actually fight in advance potential building obsolescence in a way that we make the vacant and uninhabited building productive for the city. So not just vacant and useless. So we need to actually design a whole system with its logistics and not just the building. And I think that's the most important thing here. I think that's actually the thing with resilient buildings, be it housing or some other programs. So it's not enough anymore to just think of architectural design in terms of objects with form and function. We need to design sustainable systems. So that's my story from Croatia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. But what you are trying to do in some way is trying to merge building with nature, no?
Exactly. So we see also, yeah, so we see buildings as inhabitable forms that don't necessarily need to be inhabited exclusively by humans. We kind of acknowledge that there are also other forms of inhabitation that can kind of play a ping pong with humans in this whole system.
Yes, thank you. We'll go back to you. Let me maybe point out another subject that has to be to deal with building environment knowledge. Ricardo Gares, you are a senior researcher and you led several projects closely related with Portuguese housing structures built during the 20th century. In your opinion, how can NEB contribute to improve the inhabitants' knowledge about the building environment? And how to give them also tools to improve the current housing stock, that is, their own homes?
Unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah? Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Gisela, for having me participate in this session. It's a real treat to be here and discussing these matters. The question, when you ask what can NEB do, it's really a difficult question. What can NEB do? What can we do? What can all of us do in the framework of these kind of structures and initiatives, yes, that maybe is a sort of more easier way to go about it. I think that we have a responsibility. That's the first point I would like to make, is that architects and planners in general have a responsibility that they're not fulfilling, that they're not that they are not taking care of towards communities in general. And so inhabitants and residents are, of course, part of those communities, and it's a really important issue. Housing is an issue, and so it becomes sort of the most urgent issue among many other ways of people to work within communities. I think housing is sort of priority that we all have. And what we see is that this happens not only with public sponsored housing, but very much also with private housing. And so we could say that it's a problem at large, and it's not so specific of public housing, is a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge of very simple things. And this is not to say that we should be paternalistic and now come and let people know how things are. But I do think that, and not to talk for hours here, I do think that, to try to be short and concise, I think that we have a role in reaching out to communities, but through also other players in the communities. And even like I tried to respond to your questions early in preparation for the session, I think that we should use our media savviness, if you like. So try to reach out even across outside of academia, of course. So this cannot be something that stays within academia. It has to be something that gets outside academia and into the public discourse. Things that are not only technically specifically design based, but can also be in terms of the behavior of the house. And I'm thinking, and I would like to give the example of the balcony, which is a topic that really interests me for a very long time, ever since I studied multifamily housing blocks in Lisbon that were not necessarily public built. They were many of them private built, but what you see today is an appropriation of the balcony that is comes from needs of these people, of the inhabitants, of the residents. But what happens is that people they're really not aware of the consequences of, for example, glazing of a balcony. Okay, so you have a balcony, typical modernist building of the post-war. You have these very large, very long balconies, many of them using up the entire facade of the building. And what you see across Portugal, and I know that this happens also in other contexts in other countries in the south of Europe, is that these spaces have been appropriated for the domestic use. To enlarge, to give more space to the families. But the consequence of that is dramatic. So what we specifically in Portugal have is a problem of energy poorness. So, energy poverty. We have very poor levels of comfort inside the homes. And this does not have to be specifically again, public funded homes. It could be even private funded. And I think, most of us across the country have the experience of having to wear a lot of clothes indoors in the winter because our homes are very poorly insulated. And part of that has to do with this question of balconies. Balconies having been formerly a sort of filter between the outside and the inside of the home. And nowadays they've lost that function. And I think that we could provide some information, even very scientific information, kind of demonstrating that the home would be more efficient in terms of energy use and in terms of comfort if it did not have, or if that layer would be kind of resolved in a different way. The layer I'm talking about, this intermediary space between the indoors and the outdoors. This is one example of something that I think there is information within academia, within a lot of even industrially produced information that does not reach the man on the street and the woman on the street. They don't really realize, and because we still see that happening today. We see how people today are still glazing off their balconies every day. They're doing that maybe with newer glasses and with so newer glazing, newer systems. Maybe it is a little bit more efficient, but what we also see is immediately air conditioning coming into play. And the moment we have air conditioning, the whole thing becomes lunacy. I mean, this is really in 2021. Every home having a unit of air conditioning is like we are going exactly the opposite way of what we should be doing. So I feel like we should have some kind of interference and intervention in terms of being the bridge between technical and scientists and people that study these matters and the residents. So we could be, and I'm talking about generally architects, planners, etc., could be the conduit between these two parts.
Yes, Ricardo, thank you. Your perspective is really interesting because I think that most of us here, we are researchers and we feel that difficulty to get to the public. We have our congresses, our research projects with all their outputs, but we need maybe to simplify the information to make it accessible to the general public and to the common inhabitant. And I think that your idea about getting the media involved is really, really interesting because people consume internet and media very easily. So I think that's a way, and it's not been really explored, connecting urbanism, architecture, best practice, small manuals that could help people to solve questions related to their our own problems. And we are not only talking about energy efficiency, accessibility is also a problem. People have problems getting into their homes just because they have a step and then they don't know how to solve it to get home. So
can I just add something?
Yes, Sarah.
Really quickly.
Go ahead.
Could we also think about some kind of assisted self-building programs where you connect architects with residents, so architects can provide some sort of assistance or supervision while residents continue to do their, in a way it's a self-building, right? Kind of a do-it-yourself approach.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that would be an interesting approach. We're more used to think of that in terms of developing countries, the architects sans frontières, that kind of thing. But if we think of other kind of layers in that scheme, we can think of something that is more geared towards maybe this kind of mid-level sort of societies in which we live, which are not are people that cannot possibly think of having the support of a technical agent, paid for, and so maybe we could be that bridge. We could be the provider in a way.
Yes,
voluntary.
It's interesting because we all think that when someone wants to do some little works in their home, they are going to get an architect, and that's not the reality. And maybe if we could meet them halfway, some problems would be solved. What can lead us to maybe hear Nuno Valentim, because he's an architect with a lot of experience in refurbishment, and he has a deep knowledge regarding Portuguese building culture. So we can have some better perspective. So I just have a very short question that is how can we take advantage of local construction culture to enhance resilient modes of inhabitation? No, you are okay.
Thank you, Gisela. Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure, and I'm very happy to be here and sharing some thoughts with you. We already, as Sarah was commenting, we already had some very interesting starter points from Gonçalo Byrne and local architects. Well, I can share a little bit of my experience and my point of view, because one of the main concerns that I've been having and confirming is this, what you're just talking about. This, we're always talking about design approach, project approach, and efficiency, green solutions, and we scarcely speak about how to use and and the culture of use of the buildings, and how this culture that we had before was lost meanwhile, because houses in somehow became, our period of occupation of the houses became much shorter. So all these measures that we know that our grandparents and had towards the house, this culture of use was lost naturally because of the changes of time. So we no more have animals heating the house in the ground floor. We no more have the fire burning all day long and heating the house. We no longer have the possibility of every year take care of the painting of the house outside. So, and this kind of, so our relationship with the houses change. So it's very impressive to see how Lacolle included in their participation models the knowledge of use and the profile of use of the house. This really makes a shift and makes a difference, you know, to work and to put inside the design project the profile of using. Themes like energy poverty that we deal with every day here in Portugal, that we know that people won't heat the houses, mainly in social housing. So we must really think if getting walls insulated, what in a house that won't be heated, what kind of effect this will effectively have. So that's why it's I'm really concerned of course, nothing of this should be isolated from all the measures that we can have inside the house, but probably the solution is somehow more belongs to every path that we have towards a better resilience and duration and use of the houses. So like active measures, of course, but also the use, also the profile of using, also the maintenance, also active means, passive means. And this, I believe, will lead to what we've been calling some adaptive retrofitting or adaptive use. That means that, for instance, in the same project, we can, for the ensemble of windows that we have, the global, ultimately we can use different approaches for the same typology of windows, for instance. I can use a strategy in the windows that are towards south, another strategy for the windows towards north, or for the windows that we have housing, or for the windows that we have services, or etc., etc. And this, I believe, is a much more interesting approach, not to have for each constructive element, for instance, the same thought and the same answer or the same solution. So, of course, this adaptive thought, it's more challenging, of course, because it obliges for the same windows to have, like we've had in some projects here, 7 different tactics for the same strategy. So, and well, this is would be my first approach to the theme.
Yes.
But of course, I have many thoughts here that I could share with you, but I won't take you more time with this.
Yes, maybe I can provoke you a bit. Is it affordable? Maybe in the way that local architects were talking about, that we can have sustainable architecture, but not being affordable. So maybe if you try to design all that kind of windows for a building, for a housing building, will it be affordable for the construction?
Well, I'm talking mainly of reusing and retrofit and rehabilitation buildings. This is much more affordable than to use the same strategy. Theoretically, until now, we could retrofit every window with the same strategy, and that's it. What it's not affordable is the fee for the architects, because we will give a lot of much more time in designing the 7 strategies instead of designing one, and this is also, of course, a problem, the architect's fee. And we know that for European decision, we can't have this fee, universal fee applied, and this is really a problem. It's really, because this, I believe that that's why strategies like Le Col or other strategies that will need more time of reflection can't be improved, because we don't have time, we don't have the fees to do that. So this, I'm sure, this adaptive solution, it's much, because we can adapt the costs and the intrusivity of the solution to the necessity, to the profile of use, to the, I'll give you a small example in the sequence of what Ricardo Agres was talking about. For Vasco Freitas, I believe he will talk about that. We know for now that in Porto, in a window towards south, the simple glaze has a more interesting annual energetic balance than a double glaze, because of the gains in the winter and because of what it loses in the summer. So this is very impressive, because until now, everybody would sell the idea and the myth that a double glaze would be naturally the solution. But when we talk about a year-long annual balance, energetic balance, and we put in the using profile and the gains and what we lose, this is somehow changes the paradigm and changes the attitude. And that's why this, as Gonçalo Birnes says, this is a new combat. This is a new war, because we in this combat, we must, with numbers also, and not only with feelings, and not only with good intentions, we have to combat some myths and some cultural cultural
Assumptions,
approaches,
no?
assumptions that, for instance, that to have the A, energetic efficiency in the house, we must change all the windows, or we must put the attics, that means change the exterior layer to have some insulation. This is, in the southern countries, this is not always true.
No,
this
indeed.
is not always true. So this
can I just say something that
yes,
goes
of course,
towards
yes,
what you're
Ricardo.
saying? Can I?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, it's like we were talking about guidebooks, or some sort of guidelines and things that allow us to explain in very simple terms how things could be improved. I think if we did go that way, it would be really good to be also very sensitive to each, even in a country as small as Portugal, we know that there are differences. And so there are differences in not only in building traditions, for example, and building custom, but also in what is best for each situation. So these tools that we were talking about should be really appropriated for, at a low scale as much as possible. At a scale of the local as much as possible. Of course, then this is really difficult, but we should use data and science that is locally produced, right? We should not use the science that is produced in Denmark to use in Portugal. And this is stating the obvious, but this kind of because I remember when I learned at school this kind of environmental concerns, we use the trombe walls, we use these very amazing experiments from the north of Europe, but we didn't really know how to use those in southern countries. So this kind of, we are of course today in a very different point. And we have a lot of research being done in many places that is sort of more local research. And I think that's what we should try to tap into, just going in agreement with what Nuno was saying, because it really varies, and we might be talking about issues that make no sense in a certain context, really. And it's the exact opposite that we should be saying here.
Okay, thank you, Nuno and Ricardo. Maybe now we can move from Portugal to the Italian research context. Martina, let's hear a bit about your perspective on this subject, maybe adding a few more concepts related with your field of research. So the question I have here for you is how to engage inhabitants by bridging tradition, social justice, inclusion for sure, with the necessity for innovative solutions for the future climate challenges.
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I will bring an Italian, but I think it's also a Portuguese perspective here, and also we're related to some European project that we are developing right now, especially in Bologna. Well, we found ourselves at a crossroad, because we are, of course, we need to territorialize this large policies, large political framework with the Green Deal, with also the new European Bauhaus. So we have this, in the Italian cities, we have this clash with the necessity to provide sustainability, energy efficiency in our housing stock, and a very old and historical housing stock. So we have this also conflict with the current residents that right now are living in these buildings with their habits, and also with their energetic habits. So stating this situation, we are currently trying to first tackle this issue of making the housing stock more efficient through their inhabitants. So we are trying to create a partnership which are more or less formal, but starting by getting to know the communities that are living in our habitats. And the communities, in the case of Bologna, are composed also by temporary inhabitants, such as students. So the students are a large part of the inhabitants of the city, and their behavior in terms of energy consumption, in terms of use of the buildings or the apartments, impact a lot on the efficiency of the building. So it's very difficult relations that we can have with the students, because they don't feel like inhabitants of the city. They don't feel like they're part of the community of the city. They just feel like transitory inhabitants. So the attempt that we wanted to pursue was to create a sort of purpose-related community, and we use this to generate the kind of an energy community in a specific neighborhood in Bologna, which is the Pilastro neighborhood, which is a social housing area, pretty stigmatized in the city, because it hosted initially migrants from the south of Italy in the 60s, and right now the migrants from the south of Italy are actual residents, and now the newcomers are migrants from the north of Africa, and also students. So there is this mix of population, which is pretty conflictual, and also subject to exclusion mechanism, also in terms of policies of the city. And the attempt here was to define an energy community through small behaviors of these different users, trying to engage them by example. So first, providing a shared knowledge about positive energy behaviors that they could have in their apartment, such as simply as collecting garbage in different bins, or even shutting down the water when they finish washing their teeth. Simply measures that step by step helped to create an awareness of their energy behavior, because this housing stock is also subject to energy poverty as well. So step by step, this created a sort of energy citizenship in a way. So their energy behavior defined their belonging as citizens of Bologna. And this, in a way, helped to make them gatekeepers for other inhabitants that would come after, such as children. So these people that were trained in a way provided the new knowledge and a new even suggestion for the use of their apartments or the building to other communities as well. So they became, we call them the gatekeepers or bridges of knowledge in terms of better energy behavior. And we hope that this pilot that we did in this part of Bologna could be also translated in more historical part of the city, where interventions, material intervention on the form of the building, such as renovation, is pretty difficult because of the constraints of the form of the city. Even though right now, with the brand new financing mechanism that Italy is implementing, is becoming a little bit easier to make a modification in the form of the apartment. But still, the first measures that we can implement to improve the quality of our housing stock is to better behave with what we have, with the heritage that we have. So we believe that this project, which I forgot to mention the name, it's called GRETA, Green Energy Transition Actions, will be kind of a first example on how to start kicking off this transition.
Yes, thank you, Martina. I think that you led us to the next point: participatory processes, cooperation, and resilient communities. Sara, as a researcher deeply connected with the co-design processes of collaborative housing, how can NEB bring together cultural habits, as Martina was saying, a tradition, native ways of living, and intersect them with health, inclusion, and naturally the built environment?
Thank you, Gisela. Thank you for the question and for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. And well, to answer that question, I want to start by saying that if I look at the joint statement of the new European Bauhaus, I can see some terms like co-designing sustainable solutions, inclusive participation, discuss and build together, thinking about climate, resources, and social inclusion, and tailor solutions. So these same expressions could actually describe projects that fall under the umbrella term of collaborative housing, which is an alternative and inclusive way of designing, building, and managing housing. So for those who are not familiar with the term, collaborative housing includes different types of collective self-organized housing. And some examples are co-housing initiatives, new residence cooperatives, community land trusts, self-building approaches, among others. So the project of La Borda, presented by Lacole earlier today, is an example of what it is, a collaborative housing project. So they all have in common collaboration between a group of residents and professionals to provide housing that responds to the specific needs of that particular group of residents. So basically, people become tired of obsolete housing solutions or tired of having no solutions at all. So they get together and try to provide solutions by themselves in a more autonomous way. So this, as Gonçalo Brito was saying, this represents a kind of a paradigm shift in housing provision and development when compared to what has been done since modernism. So policymakers, architects, and other agents must upgrade their modus operandi. So most of these projects are driven by values such environmental sustainability, community building, solidarity, and most recently, affordability and social inclusion. They usually exclude the middleman, so the developers, because they are the developers themselves, and aim to be out of market speculation because they are not-for-profit projects. And this allows some cost savings and also to explore other tenure forms, such as, for instance, co-ownership or grant of use cooperatives. And at the same time, there's also a shared intention of the residents to live together. So projects often include collective spaces like a common kitchen, shared laundry, as we've seen with La Borda. So basically, spatially, this allows a great deal of design innovation and space optimization. In this way of less is enough, as Carlos was saying. So we can see this collaboration and active participation of the residents during the design phase through these co-design processes. And this raised the question of the role of the architect in the whole process. And we could have a session just focus on this point. Actually, we can see collaboration in the construction process, where it includes some self-building or do-it-yourself approaches, and also during the living period. So while living together and collectively self-managing the building. But at the same time, these housing forms are yet not easy to realize, plus they're not for everyone. As said, in most cases, it is the residents themselves who design and manage their housing projects, and this requires high organizational skills, time, dedication. It also requires a deep understanding of the value of participation, self-organization, collective action, citizen empowerment, which are not easy requirements in general. And sometimes also the legal framework isn't prepared or favorable to the development of these projects, or there are not enough incentives. For instance, municipalities could create partnerships or agreements to provide access to public lands, or for instance, some financial mechanisms also need some updates because banks still do not trust in these groups, and so on and so forth. So if we think specifically in the Southern European context, this may become even trickier. But we have seen the number of collaborative housing initiatives increasing in Catalonia, as we've seen, also in Italy. We see a growing interest in countries such as Greece or Portugal. I know that in the case of Portugal, the interest is growing every day. There's already an association to promote the concept of co-housing, which is called Acora. Some groups are trying to develop already their own collective housing. And we also have some history in participatory processes with SOL, as we know. So to finalize, I believe it is a concept worth exploring and promoting, not only in the context of the NEB, but also in more general discussions related to housing.
Yes, you were talking and I was thinking about will this work in the southern countries? And then you answer it a bit, because I know that you are studying in a northern country, in Holland, and all we for sure we know good examples coming from there. And as you said, we also are seeing some examples in Spain, in Barcelona. But when we try to import that models to Portugal, for example, and I don't know what if Martina knows cases from Italy of these collaborative neighborhoods, I start to think, how will we manage this? Well, we had SAL, as you said, it worked well. We have the buildings from very well-known architects. That are architecture paradigms, but I don't know if we have to battle a bit to try to bring this kind of structures to Portugal. But I think, like Ricardo Gare stated at the beginning, that if we start with media, start to connect people with information, maybe we can get there, I guess.
Yeah. Can I?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Well, first of all, I must say that despite my name and my looks, I'm Portuguese.
Yes.
Mostly. So I'm not just bringing some northern concepts to the discussion. I'm aware of the situation, or more or less aware. And of course, I think we should also not be stuck in the past. So the SOL experience was very enriching and we have a lot to learn, but we need to move forward. So also the policies need to change. The municipalities need to be, again, more active. And citizens, and this relates to what you just said, need to be more informed about what is possible. Because I think Portuguese society tends to sit and wait for the answers. But they actually can do something. So but at the same time, the structure needs to be prepared for them to start doing. So, and also the example that Carlos gave about the way they changed the municipal normative. So it allowed them to not build the car parking because they didn't need that. So that this kind of change in people's minds need to be present. So we are aware that we can make the difference and work within the difference that can be provided to us.
Yes, thank you. Well, we have still 10 minutes. Ricardo, Dadina, maybe you can share a bit about your context and field of interest. I don't know if Ricardo he is with us.
I think, yeah, he left.
Having problems, yes.
Yes, because yes.
Okay, let us see if he comes again. Maybe I can ask Bruno if we have some questions.
Yes. Well, I just got one. It's not actually a question, but a comment. It's from
maybe you can.
Yes, it's from João Gavião, and it's directed to Nuno Valentim. And about the question where he told that sometimes single glazing windows would be best considering the whole year performance of certain buildings. But he's raising questions such as thermal condensation and interior gains that can be lost through single glazing windows. So it's a bit of what I would ask is if that position could be a bit more clarified.
Yes, The study aims to, the study of the Faculty of Engineering. I believe that Professor Vasco Freitas will, I don't know if he'll talk about it later or not. It's based on this evaluation of energy point of view and a year-long evaluation of gains and losses. Of course, this doesn't study, for instance, the acoustic measures or because of course a double glaze is better for acoustic than a single glaze, and doesn't study the phenomena of condensation that we can treat with ventilation and, for instance, as it was traditionally solved with some profile that could take care of the condensation. Or condensation is not a problem if you have to cope with it. So, of course, this is a counter view of a traditional market view over the component and over the performance. And this is the same logic to counterbalance the arguments, to say that if we look in only in another way, we have a counterbalance to that option. So everything must be seen in each circumstance and of course in a holistic way. And our role as architects, of course, and that can help people, because this is the question, to help people to have better life, better architecture, better cities, etc. Our role will for sure be of someone that has this capacity of seeing the big picture, the panoramic picture. And so this is to have some kind of relationship behind that goes behind the design process in an autistic world, communicating with communities, with it's much more, I believe, much more interesting, much more richer, much more, etc., etc. So, but as Sarah was saying, somehow the difficulties come from it's not easy to have the conditions to do it. So that's why it's we can learn with other experience and mainly learn with processes more than because this is something really difficult. I had the opportunity also to be involved in regulation towards common housing retrofit here in Portugal because of my PhD. I helped change some numbers and figures that were very, very, that damaged existing matter and existing situations. So I know these difficulties. I felt them myself, but well, this is a combat that we all must do, and to change the way things are working. To summarize it, I had 5 words here: diagnosis, of course, knowledge, awareness, not only our awareness, but the awareness of the people that will use or are using the houses, demolishing myths, because there are some cultural myths in many of these subjects, the attention to the ordinary, and that somehow is being also put in the table nowadays, and this is very, very important. And of course, as I said, the adaptive design, this capacity of not only have one solution that solves everything, but a solution with the capacity, with resilience, the capacity of changing. And to really end, I've just coming from Italy, from the Biennale. I have the fortune of having there a project, and I was also in Brescia. I just saw a Bologna beachy plan. this cycle plan, that famous cycle plan that is overall now in Italy, that can shorten the distance and make housing closer in a new form. And the author of this law, Paolo Gandolfi, a good friend of mine, talking precisely about Bologna, was saying that more than a green way of using it, the bicycle is a social measure, because people in bicycle can meet each other. So this shift also of a green thought to a social thought, it's, I believe, very, very interesting.
Yes, no, I'm looking at Jana, and she has a social measure behind her, the bike. So, Bruno, do you have
Thank you.
more? Do you have
No,
more questions? No. Okay.
No.
I think
don't know
that we
if
have.
Ricardo is here, but just to warn, we should be finishing.
Yes, we have. Like, I will try to get us 3 minutes more. Well, as we have 2 PhD students now, Jana and Sara. Sara is finishing, and 2 top researchers, Ricardo Gares and Martina Massari. I think that Nuno is a well-known practitioner and teacher at our faculty, but he just spoken a lot this session, so no more time for him. I think that maybe Ricardo in a minute, and Martin also in a minute or two, maybe you could talk a bit about your current projects, for maybe our PhD students could hear a bit about them. I know that Martina she is in a big project, ROC, I guess, and Ricardo has also a very, very interesting project that is starting now. Maybe you could explain just in a minute what you are doing now.
Okay, yeah, in a minute. I'm involved in 2 large projects. One is an ERC starting grant project, so it's like a big team along 5 years working. I'm trying to answer this $1 million question, which is how do we transmit, how do we convey solid academic information that we systematize, that we produce knowledge about, in this case, about the history of architecture and urban design in the second half of the 20th century in the Iberian Peninsula. How do we transmit that? How do we return that, or actually involve communities in producing that information? So it's like in a 2-way process. The question is, how can knowledge about architecture and architectural history, who built what, when, and why, how can this be made relevant for communities to participate in participative processes? So in a way, to have a say in the future of their built environment. More and more in the Iberian Peninsula, in the south of Europe at large, things that are now common in other parts of the world are becoming more frequent. So people want to be engaged, people want to have a say, people want to participate, they want to know what's going on their street, what is going to happen to the school where they learned or what they teach, etc. So the purpose of the project is really to provide to provide information in a very accessible way, which is why I started talking about this today in a session, because this is the topic that I'm involved in, and how to find mechanisms of involving these individuals, these collectives, these communities at large. It's like a term, community, really broad term that kind of includes many different things. How to involve them in not only stating their needs and their concerns, but also in actually producing information. So it's not so much a one-way road that we go from academia and tell them, this is very interesting, it's very valuable, it's very something. And we are talking very much about everyday architecture and urban design. We're not talking about the masterpieces of the masters of the 20th century in the Iberian Peninsula, not at all about that. It's really the other stuff that even most architects usually do not even look at, or very few look at, let alone people who actually use them. So this is also it has also kind of another agenda behind this, which is not hidden, it's very clear, which is to try to elevate the kind of role of architecture in society, you know, and try to make people aware, and the key word here is awareness, like Nuno was saying. Awareness is really one of my operative words. Make people aware that that is also architecture. So the school, the home for the elderly, the health center, etc. All these facilities, and of course the housing schemes, are also architecture, and they've been designed and they've been produced, and they, you know, so they have a sort of life in architecture that should be made evident and should be made useful, should be made relevant, so that we try to counter this tendency that we have to concrete over the planet. And in this case, currently in what we're watching and what we're having now with the resilience plans of governments across Europe, we have the famous bazooka fighting, you know, pointing in every direction. And what we risk having is a lot of things that go to waste. And we cannot afford to have that. We have a lot in our built environment that we can use. So reuse is the main word, and also awareness and information, basically.
Okay,
I took
thank you,
more than
Ricardo.
a minute. Sorry, it took me more than a minute.
Sorry,
I will
sorry
get fired.
Yes, we sorry to interrupt. We really
Yes.
need to end.
Yes, Martina will summarize in 30 seconds. Sorry,
Yeah,
Bruno,
no
tell.
problem. No problem at all. No, I just wanted to mention that I totally agree with these keywords. They were also keywords of the research H 2020 project, which is called ROC, which is just ended, and it was about the regeneration and optimization of creative and knowledge cities. So if you maybe want to go deeper into the project, you can visit the ROC website, but basically it was a matter of research and development through action in cities. So learning by doing with inhabitants, try to understand how small pilot actions performed with the inhabitants could regenerate a difficult part, social peripheries of different cities in Europe. And this was done also by learning from experiences of role model cities. One of these practice city was Lisbon. So we have this great connection also with Portugal. And I won't take more time, but I encourage you to visit our website, and where we have a lot of case studies and lessons learned that can be put into practice also in the future, following years, where we get out of this moment of pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Martina.
Thank you.
Let me finish. Thank you all for sharing your perspective. I think it will be a challenge to sum up all these ideas to improve resilience in each of our local contexts. But I think that the very warm world in the global discourses, namely the term sustainability, if changed by an expression such as local resilience, I think that could help us to focus. So I think that we need to finish. In 2 minutes, you have a video session from a movie about housing during the 20th century in Portugal. So I hope that you enjoy it, and see you all in the next future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Sorry.